him, and if they kept his laws, and if they were true to the covenant, that he would bless them. And if they went away from him and started worshiping other gods and were unfaithful to him, then he would curse them and send them into captivity. That was what Moses delivered from God to Israel at the end of Moses' time of leading them. Now, right after that, right after they go into the land of Canaan, and they cross over the Jordan River, go in and take the city of, what city? Jericho. Go in and take the city of Jericho. Then they travel through the land and they take all the rest of the land, or as much of the land as they can. And then they kind of settle into a peace there. And Joshua, as long as Joshua is alive, the people are faithful to God. But as soon as Joshua died, the people began being unfaithful to God. And they went through 300 years of judges. The book of Judges lists all of the judges that Israel had. And during that period of time, for like 40 years, they would do all right while the judge was alive. And then when the judge died, they would go right back to their life of sinning and be unfaithful to God and start worshiping the gods of the countries around them. And God would then send them into captivity again, over and over and over. Obedience, captivity, obedience, captivity. God would hear them cry out to him. He'd send them a judge. The judge would deliver them. And then that went on for 300 years. And then finally, Samuel, the book of Samuel, lists Samuel becoming the first prophet of Israel. And he was the last judge and the first prophet. And he had two sons, and his two sons were very ungodly men. They weren't the kind of men that Samuel even should have. I mean, you wouldn't even think that he would have that kind of children, but he did. And those two men were so unfaithful that the children of Israel said, "We don't want them leading us after Samuel dies. We want a king." And so they cried out for a king, and God was very offended because God was the one who'd been leading them. And he says, they have rejected me as their leader, and now they want a king. But God told Samuel, I'm going to give them the very best one I can find for them. And so God discovered one young man in all of Israel. His name was Saul. Saul was a young man in his father's house, and he was taking care of the animals of his father. And some of the goats or donkeys, some of the donkeys of his father's had wandered away, and he went off looking for them. While he was looking for these donkeys, he came to the city where the guy that was with him said, "There's a prophet here who could probably tell us where these donkeys are. We have to have something to pay him," and so they had a gift to give him. They went there, and Samuel the prophet was going to be in that city that day performing a feast for the people, and authorizing a feast for the people. And Saul and his companion came to him, and Samuel took Saul aside, anointed him as king over Israel, and told him that he was going to be king. And so Saul did become king. But Saul started out very faithful to God and a very good king. But then he got, I think he was bipolar. You know, he was really like that. And he was very paranoid, and he was schizophrenic. He was always thinking somebody was after him, somebody was trying to take his place and things like that. So finally David came into his house and was there to play a harp every time he had these fits. And so when he had one of these fits, David would play the harp, and the music would soothe him, and then he'd be all right. But 2 times he tried to kill David. And David became very close with Saul's son Jonathan. They became very close companions. And Jonathan always thought that his dad wasn't trying to kill David. But David told him, yes, he is. And said, you need to find out. And so they did. And they had a pact how they were going to do it. If he was going to go in and talk to his dad, and if his dad was really after David, he was going to come out into the wilderness there where David was and shoot an arrow past David, and then David would know that he was supposed to flee. So that happened, and he did flee, and he started running and all of that. And then David finally became king of Israel. After he became king of Israel, Israel was very strong for a period of time. David was a great king, a great leader, and he subdued all of the enemies of Israel and raised Israel to greatness in the height of the land at that time. And then David died, and his son Solomon became king. And Solomon was a good king at first, very faithful to the Lord. He was the kind of guy that God really wanted, because God said, ask me for anything that you want. And he said, I want wisdom to be able to lead these people. And God says, because you've asked for wisdom, I'm going to give you everything else. I'm going to give you power. I'm going to give you wealth. I'm going to give you everything. And he did. And Solomon, in his old age, became unfaithful to God. He started marrying all of these foreign women. He even took one into his house, and he built a house for her, and he built a temple for her God. And he went into that temple and worshiped with her. And it got to the point where Solomon was worshiping with all of his wives.
And making idols to all of them.
Yes.
All of the gods, all the wives.
Absolutely. Say that louder so everybody hears
I
it.
said making idols to all of the gods of all of his wives.
Absolutely. And so Solomon dwindled in his faithfulness to God and became unfaithful. And then he died. And upon his death, his son Rehoboam became king. Rehoboam was with his young companions who were his advisors. He decided how he was going to lead the people. He was going to be very stern with them, very strong. And he asked the old men what he should do. And the old men, the wise old men, told him that he needed to listen to the people. He needed to be kind to the people. He needed to be gentle. And that he needs to be understanding that people would love him and serve him. But his young men said, no, you need to be really hard with these people, and you need to really treat them severely. So the people came back and asked him what he was going to do. He told them, my finger is going to be stronger than my father's whole arm was. I'm going to be really severe with you. I'm going to beat you, and I'm going to really make you do what I want you to do. And the people rebelled against him and said, we're leaving. And they left, and 10 tribes went north, and the 10 northern tribes chose Jeroboam, who was down in Egypt. He had been a friend of Solomon's, but then he got at odds with Solomon, and he went to Egypt and stayed. And then the people brought him back and made him king of the northern 10 tribes. And the northern 10 tribes were immediately unfaithful. Jeroboam said to these northern tribes, he said to himself, if I let these tribes go back down to Jerusalem to worship, they're going to go back there, and they're going to finally go back to Rehoboam as king. So he said, here's what I'll do. I'm going to put a golden calf at Dan, that's in the north, and a golden calf at Bethel in the south, and I'm going to make these 2 places the places of worship for the people. And he let anybody that wanted to be a priest if they had the money to pay for it. They could just buy the priesthood. And so they had priests in Dan and priests in Bethel, and the people went to those 2 places and didn't go back to Jerusalem any longer to worship. So he led the people into idolatry immediately. Rehoboam now is in the south. he has two tribes. He has, and they call themselves Judah. The northern part of the 10 tribes call themselves Israel. The southern 2 tribes call themselves Judah. There was the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Dan.
Benjamin. Isn't it Benjamin? You said Dan.
Okay?
That was Benjamin.
It'll be Benjamin.
Okay. I hope so. Am I wrong?
The tribe of Benjamin and the tribe of Judah in the south, and in all the other tribes in the north. The 10 northern tribes were unfaithful to God. From the beginning they were unfaithful, and they became more and more unfaithful. They even made war against Judah and came down and fought against Judah several times. Finally, in 786 BC, God had Assyria come and take Israel into Assyrian captivity, and they're gone forever now. Only Judah is left. The 2 tribes down there in Judah are left. They are there until they become very unfaithful, and God kept sending the prophets to them to try to get them to repent and try to get them to turn back to Him, but they never did. And so finally, in 606 BC, Babylon comes and takes some of the tribes, takes some of them into Babylonian captivity, the best of the people. And then again, they come back in 586 and take the people again, and take most of the rest of the people. And then finally, in 536, they come and take all of them away. And there's nobody left down there. Babylon has carried off everyone into captivity. They're going to be in Babylonian captivity for 70 years. That's what the prophet Jeremiah told them, that they're going to be in captivity for 70 years. He also said that Cyrus the Great was going to release them and send them all home. Said that 70 years before Cyrus the Great ever came to the throne, before the nation ever became a powerful nation. The nation of the Medo-Persians became a powerful nation then. So, 70 years later, Israel finally comes back to the land.
Just the 2 tribes?
No, all of them. Everybody they can find. And they don't even know what tribes they're from. Some of the tribes, some of the people know which tribes they're from, some of them don't. All of the ones who couldn't tell what tribes they were from were not allowed to come back into the nation of Israel. Only those people who knew what tribe they were from were able to come back. And they came back under Nehemiah and Ezra. Ezra was the priest, Nehemiah was the leader. And one time Nehemiah was there, and he was the cupbearer to the king of Babylon. And he went in to the king, and he was very sad. And the king asked him, "Why are you so sad?" And he said, I've heard a report from Israel that the walls of the city are torn down. Everything is in disarray. The people are lacking any leadership at all. It's just a horrible mess. And he said, "I'd like to go back and rectify all of this, rebuild the temple, rebuild the walls to the city." The king of Babylon told him, "Yes, you can go." Well, it was Cyrus the Great who told him, "You can go." So he goes back to Israel and rebuilds the walls of the city, rebuilds the temple, and then the sacrifices start over again, and the people start worshiping God again. But never again are they going to be like they were. Now, that brings us to the last part of this lesson. We have covered everything through page 38. We're down to the summary. You see the summary that's there?
Fast, man. So they get to take this home and read it for themselves. It'll tell them what.
No, we got time to read it.
Oh. We said 38?
We're going to read the summary on page 38. And I would like for Emily to read the first paragraph, Lauren to read the second paragraph, and Alana to read the third paragraph of that. And then Mark, I'd like for you to read nothing.
I can do that.
Emily?
They went to the land, they possessed it, they dwelt therein, they were faithful until Joshua died, and after that, during the period of the judges, they apostatized, and this apostasy extended into the period of the monarchy. And finally, adultery was actually reinstated by a king until the time when God had to raise up the Assyrians and the Babylonians to carry away a totally apostate covenant people. The curse did come. What a terrible thing. But now God has fulfilled his promise to Abraham to make him a nation and to give that nation the land. Now he has made a promise to the nation that if they would return him by returning to the law, he would bring them back.
That's God's promise. If you return to me, I'll bring you back to the land. They're in captivity now. All right.
Now it shall come to pass, when all things come upon you, the blessings and the curse which I have set for you, and you call them to mind among all the nations where the Lord your God drives you, and you return to the Lord your God and obey his voice according to all that I command you today. You and your children with all your heart and all your soul, that the Lord your God will bring you back from captivity and have compassion on you and gather you again from all the nations where the Lord your God has scattered you. If any of you are driven out to the farthest parts under heaven, from there the Lord will gather you. From there the Lord your God will gather you, and from there he will bring you. Then the Lord your God will bring you to the land which your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it. He will prosper you and multiply you more than your fathers. And the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your descendants to love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and that you may live.
Also the Lord your God will throw all these curses on your enemies and on those who hate you, who persecuted you. And you will again obey the voice of the Lord, do all his commandments, which I command you today. The Lord your God will make you abound in all the work of your hands, in the fruit of your body, in the increase of your livestock, and in the produce of your land for good. For the Lord will again rejoice over you for good, as he rejoiced over your fathers, if you obey the voice of the Lord your God, to keep his commandments and his statutes, which are written in this book of the law. And if you turn to the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul.
God's only condition for them was for them to return to him with all of their heart and all of their soul, and he would bring them back to the land and bless them. He does that. The Old Testament story is now over. We have now come to the very end of the Old Testament. It began with God making a promise to Abraham back in Genesis chapter 15, chapter 12, chapter 15, and chapter 17. He made the promises to Abraham. Then he made the promise to Isaac his son. Then he made the promise to Jacob. All of that was fulfilled when the children of Israel went down to Egypt. There they became a mighty nation. God delivered them from there, brought them through the wilderness into the land. They lived in the land for, 1,300 years. And that, not 1,300, 300 and 700 years. So they lived in the land 1,000 years.
As in land of Canaan?
In the land of Canaan for 1,000 years. And then, now, at the end of that, we are going to discover next how God brings in Christ, who is the one to whom the promise is actually made. A promise was made to Abraham, in your seed, I'm going to bless all the nations of the earth. And God is going to do that when we see Christ come into the world, which is going to be next week's lesson, I believe. So, you're dismissing. Yes?
How many years, how long was the northern kingdom of Israel in the Assyrian captivity? How long were they?
They were there from, let's